Have you ever wondered why some prayers seem to just float away, while others bring incredible peace and change your life? Today, we're going to explore a powerful warning that Pope John Paul II shared about the Rosary, especially before Holy Week. This isn't just any ordinary message. It might completely transform how you experience the most sacred days of the Christian calendar. Imagine this. Sarah, a devoted Catholic from Boston, had been praying the Rosary every day for 20 years. She was faithful and consistent, but despite her dedication, she felt something was missing. Her prayers seemed mechanical, almost like checking off an item from her to-do list. During one particularly difficult Lent, while caring for her sick husband and struggling with financial pressures from medical bills, she stumbled upon Pope John Paul's teachings about the Rosary. What she discovered changed everything about her spiritual journey, her approach to family finances, and even her physical well-being. You see, Pope John Paul II wasn't just any pope when it came to the Rosary. He had a profound devotion to this prayer, and even dedicated an entire apostolic letter to it, Rosarium Virginis Mariae. In it, he revealed something that many faithful Catholics miss, especially when approaching Holy Week. Hey friends, if you're enjoying this content, so far I'd really appreciate if you'd hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our weekly videos on faith and life. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Your support helps our community grow, and I'm truly grateful for each one of you joining us on this spiritual journey. Let's continue with what Pope John Paul called the grave mistake many make when praying the Rosary. According to his teachings, the most serious error is praying without true contemplation, moving your lips while your mind wanders elsewhere. During Holy Week especially, when heaven is spiritually more open to our prayers, this mistake can prevent us from experiencing the profound grace this prayer offers. Sarah realized she had been guilty of this very error. For years, she would recite the prayers while making dinner, worrying about bills, or thinking about her to-do list for the next day. Her Rosary had become background noise in her busy life, rather than a moment of divine encounter. So what did Pope John Paul II advise that transformed Sarah's experience? He taught that the Rosary isn't just a series of repeated prayers. It's a contemplative journey where we gaze upon the face of Christ with Mary. This approach completely changes how we pray, especially during Holy Week. The Pope outlined a method that many faithful have found transformative. First, he suggested creating an inner altar, a sacred space within your heart before beginning to pray. This means taking a few moments of silence, removing distractions, and consciously placing yourself in God's presence. For Sarah, this meant turning off the television, finding a quiet corner in her home, and lighting a candle to mark this time as sacred. Secondly, John Paul emphasized true contemplation with each mystery. When praying the sorrowful mysteries during Holy Week, he encouraged believers to truly imagine themselves present at each scene of Christ's Passion. Sarah began to visualize the Garden of Gethsemane, feeling the cool night air, hearing the disciples struggling to stay awake, witnessing Jesus in profound prayer. Suddenly, the mysteries weren't just titles, they became living scenes she could enter through prayer. Thirdly, the Pope taught the importance of offering specific intentions with each decade. Rather than a general "for world peace" approach, he would dedicate each decade to specific needs. Sarah began offering her first decade for her husband's healing, another for wisdom in managing their medical expenses, another for their children who were worried about their father's health. This practice connected her daily concerns with her spiritual life in a profound way. The fourth element of John Paul's method involved making a small preparatory sacrifice before praying. He believed that prayer united with sacrifice had special power. Sarah chose to give up her afternoon coffee and use that time instead for her Rosary. This small act of self-denial helped focus her attention and reminded her that prayer requires something of us. Finally, the Pope insisted on concluding with sincere supplication. Instead of rushed, automatic prayers at the end, he encouraged believers to pour out their hearts authentically. Sarah began ending her rosary with heartfelt conversation with God, speaking as she would to a loving Father about her fears, hopes, and needs. Within weeks, Sarah noticed remarkable changes. Her anxiety about their financial situation began to diminish as she gained clarity about priorities and unnecessary expenses. She found herself making wiser decisions about their household budget, eliminating wasteful spending that she hadn't previously recognized. The time spent in prayer also reduced her stress levels significantly, which her doctor confirmed was helping her blood pressure normalize. But perhaps most surprisingly, her relationship with her husband deepened during his illness. The contemplative approach to prayer had taught her to be more present in her daily life too. She listened more attentively, spoke more thoughtfully, and found herself more patient during difficult moments. The fruits of contemplative prayer were extending into every aspect of her life. Pope John Paul II warned about 3 specific errors that believers should avoid, especially during Holy Week. The first, as we've discussed, is praying only with the lips while the heart and mind are elsewhere. The second error is ignoring the sorrowful mysteries during Holy Week. This sacred time calls us to focus particularly on Christ's passion and death. John Paul taught that uniting ourselves with Christ's suffering through Mary's eyes is especially powerful during this liturgical season. The third error the Pope cautioned against was using the Rosary as a protective charm without genuine conversion. Some Catholics treat the Rosary almost like a spiritual insurance policy, believing that merely owning or carrying one provides protection. John Paul insisted that the Rosary is a school of holiness, not an amulet. Its power comes from how it transforms our hearts, minds, and actions through contemplation of the Gospel. As Holy Week approaches this year, many Catholics are rediscovering John Paul's teachings and experiencing profound renewal in their prayer lives. Frank, a retired teacher from Chicago, shared how this approach helped him overcome a lifelong struggle with anger after his wife's passing. "When I began to truly contemplate Christ's forgiveness from the cross," he said, "something broke open in my heart. I found myself able to forgive hurts I'd been carrying for decades." Maria, a nurse from Philadelphia, found that praying the Rosary, according to John Paul's method, helped her manage the extreme stress of working in healthcare during difficult times. "I was burning out," she admitted, "but setting aside 20 minutes each evening to truly enter into contemplative prayer gave me a resilience I didn't know was possible." She discovered that the spiritual wisdom gained through proper prayer translated directly into better self-care habits and more balanced professional boundaries. This connection between spiritual practice and physical well-being wasn't accidental in Pope John Paul's teaching. He understood that the human person is an integrated whole, body, mind, and spirit. When we pray well, we live well. Many doctors today recognize that contemplative practices like the Rosary can significantly reduce stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which over time can damage the cardiovascular system. The slow, rhythmic breathing that naturally accompanies Rosary prayer resembles the measured breathing techniques prescribed by many health professionals for anxiety and stress management. But John Paul's warning wasn't just about personal benefits. He believed that a Rosary prayed with proper contemplation had extraordinary spiritual efficacy for the entire Church and world. During the most difficult moments of his papacy, from the Cold War tensions to personal assassination attempts, John Paul turned to the Rosary as his anchor and sword. He was convinced that Mary's intercession through this prayer had the power to change history itself. When properly prayed, especially during Holy Week, John Paul taught that the Rosary produces invisible effects that ripple outward: interior peace, spiritual clarity, reconciliation between divided hearts, and healing of old wounds. He believed it could contribute to the salvation of souls, including those in purgatory. In his personal testimony, the Pope often spoke of how the Rosary sustained him through Nazi occupation, communist persecution, and the burden of leading the global church through turbulent times. There's a striking contrast, according to John Paul, between rosaries that bear fruit and those that remain sterile. A rosary prayed with distraction and haste is like a seed fallen on rocky ground. It produces nothing. But a rosary, offered with love and attention, rises to heaven like pleasant incense. The Pope insisted, repetition is not useless if it is filled with love. This insight challenges our modern efficiency-focused mindset that often values novelty over depth. Let's consider the experience of Michael, a successful business owner from Seattle who was facing difficult decisions about his company's financial future. 20 employees depended on his leadership, and the stress was affecting his sleep and family relationships. Michael wasn't particularly religious, but his grandmother had always prayed the Rosary, and in a moment of desperation, he decided to try it. At first, he struggled with the repetition and found his mind constantly wandering to work problems. But remembering John Paul's teaching that each mystery should be a window into gospel truth, he began to approach it differently. During the third sorrowful mystery, the crowning with thorns, Michael reflected on Christ's quiet dignity amid mockery and humiliation. This contemplation gradually transformed how he handled criticism in business meetings and gave him courage to make unpopular but necessary decisions with compassion. Interestingly, the financial wisdom that emerged from Michael's contemplative prayer didn't come as specific investment strategies, but as clarity about core values and priorities. He realized that his anxiety wasn't really about money, but about fear of failure and judgment. This insight allowed him to separate essential business concerns from his ego's needs, resulting in more measured, wise leadership decisions. Pope John Paul's own example speaks volumes about the power of the Rosary. Even in his final days, weakened by Parkinson's disease and unable to speak clearly, the Rosary beads were constantly in his hands. Visitors to his private chapel often found him absorbed in this prayer before dawn. He called it his favorite prayer and the prayer of my heart. During Holy Week especially, John Paul recommended deepening our engagement with the sorrowful mysteries. These 5 scenes from Christ's Passion, his agony in the garden, scourging at the pillar, crowning with thorns, carrying of the cross, and crucifixion, offer a profound journey into the heart of our salvation. The Pope believed that by walking this path with Mary, we learn to face our own suffering with dignity and purpose. Robert, a widower from Denver, found this approach particularly healing during his first Holy Week, after losing his wife of 42 years. "I couldn't pray at all at first," he confessed. "The grief was too raw." But guided by his parish priest to try John Paul's method of truly visualizing each mystery, Robert found unexpected comfort. "When I contemplated Jesus meeting his mother on the way of the cross, I somehow felt my wife's presence too. It was as if Mary understood exactly what both Jesus and I were feeling. For the first time since the funeral, I could cry healing tears." The financial dimensions of grief also weighed heavily on Robert. Managing household finances alone after decades of partnership was overwhelming. Yet through his contemplative prayer, he found himself approaching these practical matters with newfound wisdom. "I realized I was making decisions from fear rather than prudence," he shared. "After truly entering into the mysteries of Christ's Passion, my perspective shifted. I could see which financial concerns were genuine and which were anxiety speaking." This clarity enabled him to make sound decisions about his retirement and future care needs. John Paul's warning about superficial rosary prayer takes on special significance before Good Friday. These most solemn days of the Christian year call for our deepest spiritual attention. According to tradition, the veil between heaven and earth grows thinner during Holy Week, and prayers offered with sincere hearts carry particular weight. Each Ave Maria, well prayed, becomes an act of consolation to the suffering Jesus. Elizabeth, a grandmother from Miami, discovered this truth when facing a health crisis during Holy Week last year. Diagnosed with a serious condition requiring major surgery, she was overwhelmed with fear. Her doctor, noticing her rosary beads, surprised her by sharing that he too was Catholic. "Let me tell you what Pope John Paul said about praying during difficult times," he told her. The physician explained how the pontiff had taught that uniting our suffering with Christ's through contemplative prayer wasn't just spiritually valuable. It created tangible peace that supported physical healing. Taking this advice to heart, Elizabeth began praying her daily rosary differently. Instead of rushing through it while watching television, she set aside a quiet time each evening, created a small prayer space with a candle and crucifix, and truly entered into each mystery. By Holy Thursday, she noticed something remarkable. Her anxiety had decreased significantly, her blood pressure had stabilized, and she was sleeping better. The medical team commented on her unusual calm before such major surgery. "I realized that for years I'd been carrying the rosary, but not really praying it," Elizabeth reflected after her successful procedure. Pope John Paul was right. There's all the difference in the world between reciting prayers and truly entering into communion with Christ through them. Her recovery exceeded expectations, which her doctor attributed partly to her extraordinary peace of mind. This transformation exemplifies what John Paul called the School of Mary, learning to see Christ through her eyes and to respond to life with her faithful courage. The Pope wasn't merely suggesting a devotional practice, he was offering a comprehensive spiritual path that integrates faith with daily living, including how we handle our health, finances, and relationships. The Pope's teaching about the Rosary isn't merely theoretical, it's intensely practical. His method offers a way to transform what might be a rote recitation into a life-changing encounter. As we approach Holy Week, his guidance becomes particularly relevant. Let's explore how several ordinary Americans have applied his wisdom to their lives. Thomas, a retired military officer from Texas, found himself struggling with purpose after ending his long career. Despite financial security, he felt adrift spiritually. A chance encounter with a book about Pope John Paul's rosary teachings coincided with preparations for Holy Week at his parish. "I had always respected John Paul's courage on the world stage," Thomas explained, "but I never realized how deeply spiritual his approach to prayer was." Beginning on Palm Sunday, Thomas committed to praying all 20 mysteries of the Rosary throughout Holy Week according to the Pope's method. The difference was immediate and profound. "For the first time, I wasn't just saying prayers, I was entering into scenes from Christ's life," he recalled. "During the agony in the garden, I could almost feel the cool night air, see the disciples struggling to stay awake, sense Christ's profound anguish." This contemplative approach spilled over into Thomas's approach to his retirement finances. As well, "I had been obsessing about investment returns and market fluctuations," he admitted. "But meditating on Christ's words about storing treasures in heaven shifted something fundamental in my perspective." Without abandoning responsible financial management, Thomas found himself making more generous charitable decisions and experiencing greater peace about economic uncertainties. His blood pressure, which had been concerning his doctor, began to stabilize as financial anxiety decreased. Joyce, an elementary school principal from Michigan, discovered similar benefits when she applied John Paul's method during Holy Week. Last year, overwhelmed with administrative responsibilities and budget constraints, she had been bringing work stress home every evening. My prayer life had become just another task on my to-do list, she confessed. I would rush through the Rosary before bed, often falling asleep before finishing. Inspired by the Pope's warning against superficial prayer, Joyce created a small prayer corner in her home office. Each evening of Holy Week, she would light a candle, silence her phone, and spend 20 minutes in contemplative prayer with the Rosary. The first night was incredibly difficult, she remembered. My mind kept racing to unfinished tasks and upcoming meetings, but by Wednesday of Holy Week, something shifted. Joyce found that truly entering into the sorrowful mysteries gave her a new perspective on her professional challenges. Contemplating Christ carrying his cross helped her see her administrative burdens differently. I realized I had been trying to control everything myself, instead of sharing responsibilities appropriately with my team, she said. This insight led to practical changes in how she delegated tasks and managed her time, resulting in both more efficient school operations and improved personal well-being. The Pope's emphasis on offering specific intentions with each decade also transformed Joyce's approach to difficult situations. Rather than a general anxiety about school finances, she began praying specifically about wise resource allocation and creative funding solutions. Within 2 weeks, our school received an unexpected grant opportunity that addressed our most pressing needs, she said. I don't believe that was coincidence. David, a construction worker from Nevada dealing with chronic back pain, found physical as well as spiritual benefits from John Paul's approach to the Rosary. His doctor had warned that stress was exacerbating his condition, but traditional relaxation techniques hadn't helped much. I was raised Catholic, but hadn't really practiced in years, David explained. During a particularly bad pain episode, before Easter, my mother suggested I try praying the Rosary the way Pope John Paul taught. Somewhat skeptically, David began setting aside 15 minutes each evening. Following the Pope's advice to create an inner altar before praying, he would sit in a supportive chair, adjust his posture to minimize discomfort, and consciously place himself in God's presence before beginning. At first it felt awkward, he admitted, but by Good Friday, something remarkable happened. While meditating on Christ's suffering on the cross, I found myself able to view my own pain differently. Not that it disappeared, but I stopped fighting against it so intensely. David's physical therapist noticed the difference in his next session. Your muscles are less tense, she commented. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. The reduced tension allowed more effective treatment, and within weeks, David experienced significant improvement. Equally important was his renewed spiritual connection. I realized I had been angry at God about my condition, he reflected. Through the Rosary, I found a way back to faith that made sense even amid suffering. Pope John Paul's warning about praying the Rosary properly isn't about imposing guilt, but offering freedom. He invited believers not just to pray more, but to pray better, to make each Rosary a true journey alongside Christ and Mary. As he wrote in his apostolic letter, the Rosary, though clearly Marian in character, is at heart a Christocentric prayer. Its power comes from how it draws us into the central mysteries of our salvation. This Holy Week presents a perfect opportunity to heed the Pope's warning and transform our approach to this ancient prayer. As we contemplate Christ's passion through Mary's eyes, we gain new perspective on our own challenges, whether they involve health concerns, financial pressures, or relationship difficulties. Many who have applied John Paul's method testify that the wisdom gained through contemplative prayer brings practical benefits to every dimension of life. Catherine, a family physician from Oregon, has even begun prescribing contemplative rosary, prayer to interested patients dealing with anxiety and stress-related conditions. The slow, rhythmic nature of the prayer naturally regulates breathing and calms the nervous system, she explained. But beyond these physiological benefits, patients who embrace the spiritual dimensions often report more profound healing. One of her patients, a 67-year-old man with hypertension, found that 20 minutes of contemplative prayer each evening, according to John Paul's method, reduced his blood pressure readings more effectively than an additional medication his previous doctor had prescribed. Of course, I don't suggest replacing necessary medications, Catherine clarified, but the complementary effects of spiritual practice on physical health can be remarkable. And as Holy Week approaches, Pope John Paul's warning about properly praying the Rosary invites us to deeper encounter. Rather than viewing the Rosary as merely a devotional practice or spiritual obligation, we can embrace it as he did, as a path to transformation that integrates body, mind, and spirit. By entering into each mystery with full attention and authentic devotion, we open ourselves to grace that extends far beyond the minutes spent in prayer. In the words of Pope John Paul himself, "The Rosary is my favorite prayer, a marvelous prayer, marvelous in its simplicity and its depth." And this Holy Week, his warning challenges us not just to pray the Rosary, but to pray it well, with heart, mind, and soul fully engaged. In doing so, we may discover, as he did, that this ancient prayer offers wisdom and strength for every aspect of modern life. For those who take his warning seriously and commit to praying the Rosary contemplatively before Good Friday, the fruits may extend far beyond spiritual comfort. Like Sarah, Thomas, Joyce, David, and countless others who have applied John Paul's method, we may find new clarity in decision-making, reduced anxiety about finances, improved physical well-being, and deeper connections in our relationships. The Pope's legacy includes many world-changing accomplishments, but perhaps his guidance on how to pray the Rosary properly, especially during Holy Week, remains one of his most personal and profound gifts to ordinary believers seeking to integrate faith with daily living. As we stand at the threshold of the most sacred days of the Christian year, his warning reminds us that how we pray matters as much as that we pray. By heeding his counsel to pray the Rosary with authentic contemplation, specific intentions, preparatory sacrifice, and sincere supplication, we open ourselves to transformation that touches every dimension of our lives: spiritual, emotional, physical, and even financial. In the hushed moments of Holy Week, as we contemplate Christ's passion through Mary's faithful eyes, we may discover, as Pope John Paul did, that the ancient beads of the Rosary offer not just comfort, but profound wisdom for navigating our modern world with courage, clarity, and compassion.